All right, let's talk BYU football because remember last year, BYU came off a triumphal victory over the University of Utah and then very quickly went down two straight losses in a row, losing to Kansas in pretty ignominious fashion, and then following that up with a game against Arizona State that had quite a bit of theatrics to it, and BYU almost coming back in said contest. But once again, an L in the column that ultimately cost them their dream a season ago after starting 9-0. They had dreams of going to the Big 12 title game, and they came oh so close. Strength of record and a few other metrics when it came to the tiebreakers cost BYU. They have talked, I'm telling you, time and time and time again throughout training camp. They talked about going from good to great. And Kalani, if you watch the cut this week, is using the term humble and hungry. BYU knows how close they were a season ago, and they know how much the post-rivalry aftermath cost them a year ago. So how do they go about combating that? Well, I think the number one thing they do is learn from their mistakes a season ago. They probably, coming off that win against Utah, were feeling really, really good about themselves. And sandwiched in between that matchup against Utah and then obviously a highly anticipated matchup at that point on the road at Arizona State, I would venture to say, I don't know this for certain, that some people took their eye off the task at hand and maybe overlooked Kansas ever so much, because Kansas at that point, sub 500, even though Kansas, speaking of the Jayhawks, was rolling when they came into Provo, Utah. You look at the record, and you maybe have taken them just a little bit lightly, and had a quick kick from Jalen Daniels not glanced off the helmet of, I think it was Evan Johnson, if I recall. Things may have been different in that game. The simple fact of the matter is I think BYU understands that you cannot lose sight of the goal and the task at hand. And that's why you hear all the time, it's a 1-week season. This BYU team was really, really good about that a season ago for essentially 11 of the 13 weeks they played. Those 2 weeks that they essentially took their eye off the goal or let it affect them, those were the post-rivalry lull that cost them, as I said, the ultimate goal of playing in Arlington and maybe going to the college football playoff. I believe that BYU's players, coaches, administrators, everybody involved with what happened a season ago have every intention on avoiding that very same scenario. Now, could they go to Iowa State and just get beat straight up? Absolutely. Matt Campbell has built an incredible pillar of consistency with the Cyclones. It is not an easy game, and our friends at FanDuel have installed BYU as a betting underdog in this game. No matter. BYU thrives as an underdog. We have seen that all year long. They continually seem to get overlooked, and I do think part of it is that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they don't bet. So betting markets have to, make up the ground to encourage, bets to come in on both sides. That's why you see lines maybe move as much as they did on the day of the game against Utah. The bigger point to be had here is BYU has learned lessons from a season ago, or they claim to have learned those lessons from a season ago. The proof will be in the pudding this week when they face off against Iowa State. The nice part is you don't have a game necessary to look beyond Iowa State too, because ISU is good enough that you shouldn't be looking past them. Yeah, have they absorbed some injuries? Absolutely. But they have had a bye week to heal up and get ready and study extra tape of BYU. And I'm sure they've got a few things, a few wrinkles that they will throw BYU's way in this game in Ames on Saturday. The other thing is BYU has a bye week after this. There's no looking all the way 3 weeks down the road to Texas Tech, because you shouldn't be looking that far down the road. You need to focus now and understand that right now, that's what matters. Getting to 8-0 and pushing your ranking inside the top 10, because we're very quickly coming up on the season when the rankings actually matter, and that is the college football playoff rankings. They start coming out in the month of November. BYU needs to bolster their position as best they possibly can with a win this week in Ames, if at all possible, and find themselves inside the top 10, because a season ago, remember looking back at the CFP rankings, they mirrored a lot of what the AP poll was doing most of the year a season ago. So BYU knows that they cost themselves with having a slow, uptake last year with regards to the national media. Well, BYU's knocking on the door of the top 10. If you beat Iowa State this week, you're going to be inside the top 10, and that's exactly where you want to be entering the final stanza of your season. Yeah, the schedule is unrelenting, because after Iowa State, you get a brief respite with the bye week, and then you go to Texas Tech, you're home to TCU, and then you go to Cincinnati. You'll only be halfway through after Saturday of the 6-game stretch that Aaron Roderick himself called the toughest stretch in BYU football history. But you have to get through it. and you have to fight tooth and nail. There's a lot of guys on this BYU team who are probably in desperate need of a bye week. You look at some of these guys, and we're seeing a lot of shoulder harnesses with regards to shoulder injuries that pop up throughout the season. There's a lot of those guys donning those. A lot of guys wearing horse collars. A lot of guys you're seeing wearing extra pads and whatnot to nurse along injuries. The thing about the Iowa State game is it's going to maybe be the toughest one of the season because you know that little break is right there. You're right on the precipice of getting that respite and the time you need to recover a little extra. But as Kalani Sitake has said multiple times before this, it is time to empty the tank. You have to go out there and give it everything within your power. Like I said, could BYU go in, literally give it all they've got and lose to Iowa State? Yeah, I absolutely couldn't see that happening because I really think Iowa State is a really, really solid program. And even with the injuries that they've absorbed, a guy like Matt Campbell, I don't put anything past him. He was speaking glowingly of Kalani Sitake and the BYU football program in his press conference this week, saying that if he had a son that could play college football, he would send him to play for a guy like Kalani Sitake. Those are great platitudes. Those are great things to say. Is he trying to butter BYU, make them feel good about themselves? Maybe. There may be a little gamesmanship there. But the bigger point is BYU knows how dearly the exultation over beating Utah and the rivalry win a season ago, how much it ultimately cost them, because there is a come down effect. You hype yourself up so much. There is so much stress. Parker Kingston said it himself this week in media availability. He said, you finish that game, all of a sudden you realize there is a ton of stress lifted off your shoulders. You can't have that equate to you being too relaxed. Then you walk into Ames, Iowa. The Cyclones come through like a hurricane, to use two different expressions, and mix them together. And all of a sudden, you're sitting and saying, what in the heck just happened? You don't want to limp into a bye week with your first loss of the year and suddenly find yourself plummeting down the rankings, much like Texas Tech did after their loss to Arizona State. Tech went from 7 to 14. If the logic holds, could BYU drop from 11 to like 20? Yeah, that very well could be the case. So the whole goal for BYU is focus on the here and now, put everything you've got into this game plan, give your heart, soul, mind, body, whatever it takes to go and get this victory, and find yourself sitting pretty at 8-0 going into a bye week, and then rest up and get ready for the stretch run, because that is when it really comes into focus of what your ultimate goal is, and that is the Big 12 title game, potentially a Big 12 championship, and ultimately a chance to play for a national title. That is all out there for BYU, but they cannot lose sight of the fact that this week, it's the most important week because it's the next week. That's seems too simplistic in many people's minds, and I'm sure you're probably going to comment in the comment section about it, but it's really what it comes down to.